Thanks for joining us for this podcast from Atlee Church. Atlee is a safe place for those who've given up on church or never went. Our mission is to reach seekers and equip believers to love God, love themselves, love others, and serve the world. We'd love to have you connect with us at one of our physical campuses or online for a weekend service. You can find out more about our locations and service times on our website. We hope that you will be encouraged and challenged to take the next step in your personal faith journey through the message you're about to hear.
Good morning. Welcome to all of our campuses this morning. I don't know about you guys, but I really enjoyed my extra hour of sleep last night. Did anybody take full advantage of that? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. In fact, I'm got so much energy today. I think my message is going to be about 30 minutes longer than normal, so I hope that's okay with everybody. I do want to welcome all of our campuses and especially those watching online this morning. I happen to know that we have some folks watching from Bromwell, West Virginia, of all places today, so welcome them this morning with us. So here at Atlee, we have a mission statement that says this: we exist to reach seekers, everybody say reach. To reach seekers and equip believers, everybody say equip. To equip believers to love God, love themselves, love others, and to serve the world. Everybody say serve. The heart of this series is to do just that. To equip all of us with the resources and the tools that we need to maintain a healthy relationship with God, with ourselves, and with each other. Now, specifically throughout this series, we're looking at spiritual disciplines. Things that we can and should incorporate into our lives, disciplines that Jesus modeled for us so that we can live the life that we were created to live. The life that we were created to live, if we're honest, is the life that we're all trying to live, but seem to keep coming up short because we're missing some of these disciplines in our lives. And that's why I think Paul, an early follower of Jesus Christ and writer of much of the New Testament, wrote this to a guy named Timothy. He said, "Timothy, train yourself to be godly, for physical training is of some value." Now, we don't know a whole lot about Timothy. There are two letters in the New Testament part of our Bible where Paul wrote to Timothy. We learn a little bit about Timothy in the book of Acts, but we know very little about him. But I get this idea that Timothy was one of these healthy young guys who was trying to take care of himself. Maybe he exercised on a regular basis. Maybe he tried to eat good. And so when Paul wrote to him and said this to them, maybe that's part of what was going on in his life. But he wrote to this and said this to him because Timothy would understand it. Train yourself to be godly, for physical training is of some value. But, Paul says, godliness has value for all things, holding promise for both the present life and the life to come. Now, for some of you, you've seen this verse a lot. We've been going through this series. It's popped up several times. In fact, it's kind of the driving verse for this series. And because you've seen it so many times, maybe you're going to have a tendency to, not really think about it, you dismiss it a little quickly. And I want to encourage you not to do it, because this verse holds the key to the life that you and I want to live. And again, here it is. Train yourself to be godly, because it has value for all things. It has value for all things. Now, the challenge is the hard work that comes along with these disciplines, with living them out. See if you can't relate to this next verse in Hebrews. It says, "No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful." Can anybody relate to that? So think of it this way. Lynette and I like to go for walks, and we try to go a couple times a week. Our best time is really early in the morning, the first thing before our day gets started. But the hardest part of doing that is putting on our shoes and getting out the door in the morning. I'll be honest with you, that is painful. It is painful to do that and to walk out the back door. And so we understand that. So no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. However, later on, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. So in a physical sense, while it's painful getting to that point, by the time that we're done with our 20-mile walk that morning, well, it seems like it's 20 miles, usually somewhere between 2 and 3 miles, man, I can't tell you how much better we feel and how much better our day seems to go. Well, the same thing is true when it comes to spiritual disciplines. They're awkward maybe, they're hard to get up early in the morning and have that devotion or carve out that time for small group or even getting here on a Sunday morning, because this takes discipline to do this. And at first it does seem painful, because we're like, oh man, I just want to sleep in, or I really would like to take this time and do something else. But once we've done it, we're glad we did, because of the results that come from that. It's hard work, but it's worth it. So we've titled this series, The Ultimate Challenge, with this tagline: if it doesn't challenge you, it won't what? It won't change you. Now, as you read your Bible, you can't help but notice how many times Jesus challenged people. He challenged people to think differently. He challenged them to live their life differently. As you open up the Bible and you begin to read the New Testament, in fact, the very first book of the New Testament, the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew records the life of Christ and all that took place, and from his birth up until his death and even his resurrection. But at the very beginning of his writing, as Jesus began his earthly ministry, we see that Jesus started with challenging people. Challenging them in the way that they thought and ultimately in the way that they acted. In Matthew chapter 5, we find this famous passage. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. Now, if you think my messages are long, you need to go back and read these first several chapters of Matthew. Jesus took a day and taught all day long. And one of the things that makes this passage or this sermon, this teaching experience so powerful and so famous is because of all the different things that he taught on this given day. And hundreds of thousands of people just gathered there to listen to what he had to say. And so as he begins this teaching, one of the first things that he does is he makes these 9 incredible statements. Statements that on the surface, when you're listening to him, I mean, you talk about challenging the way that you think and the way that you act. These 9 statements are known as the Beatitudes. Everybody say Beatitudes. They were attitudes that Jesus said each of us should have. But if you look at each one of them, I promise they will challenge you, because at the heart of it, it's not the attitude that we normally start our day with. In fact, they're not the attitudes that we pretty much live our life by. I want to look at one particular, this one in Matthew chapter 5, verse 5. Here's what Jesus said: blessed or happy are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed, happy are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Now, I highlight this one because I want to use it to set up today's discipline. Now, when you think of someone who is meek, what do you think of? What does that person look like? Someone who is shy, maybe timid, maybe laid back, kind of easygoing, reserved. They're not very forward. They're not very strong-willed. They're just kind of even-keeled, If someone said to you that you are a meek person, how would you take that? As a compliment or as something else? More than likely, you really wouldn't know how to take it. And if you're a guy like me, your first response to that, if you don't really understand what meekness is you wouldn't see it as a compliment. You might even, well, I don't want to be meek. I want to be, big and bold and all the things that we think are just the opposite of that. And here's why: because when we hear the word meekness, we usually think of the word weakness, don't we? I mean, isn't that the first thing that comes to mind when we hear the word meekness? So to hear Jesus say this, blessed are the meek, or blessed are the weak, for they will inherit the earth, we're not really sure what to do with that. I mean, what does he mean? The weak are going to inherit the earth? Is that really what he's talking about? Listen, meekness has nothing to do with weakness. Meekness has nothing to do with weakness, but it does have everything to do with today's discipline. So let me give you a working definition today of this word meekness. All right? It's not in your notes, but if you want to write this down and come back to it, I think that this will make sense. Here's the working definition that I'm going to give you for the word meekness. Harnessed power. Harnessed power. Now, I'll give you a word picture here. So there are two things that come to mind when I think of the word meekness. And the first one is this right here. Let me show you this picture. These two horses, that's my grandfather in the middle. I'm not 100% sure who the other two people are, but I want to focus on his two horses because I remember these horses as a small child. It was Molly and Polly were the name of these two horses, and they were stinking incredible. They were the biggest animals I believe I had ever seen. You can kind of see their feet. The picture doesn't do it justice, but you get a good idea. These things had the biggest hooves on them of any horses I have ever seen. And you talk about powerful, I'm not so sure there wasn't anything these two horses couldn't do. I mean, I've seen them pull a wagon full of hay that I think some tractors would struggle to pull. I've seen them pull rakes where they rake up the hay and just pull it all day long, plow a hard ground. And I mean, they would just, it was unbelievable the power that these horses had. And at times they were very strong-willed. And my grandfather and them would tell me stories that there were times where they just didn't want to cooperate. And I can only imagine how scared it would be to be around that kind of power, especially if they weren't, in a good mood that day. But my grandfather had this way of harnessing these things and putting these harnesses on them and hooking them up to whatever it was that he needed them to do that day, and they would do whatever he asked them to do. And even in this picture, here are these two incredible workhorses, and that's exactly what they were, with two people riding them like they're just ponies, like they're just, horses that you would ride any given day of the week. But that was so not really the character of these horses. And so when I think of this idea of meekness, I always think about these two horses. I go back to my childhood and I just think, man, these things were just humongous, and they had such power. Horses is where we kind of rate motors from, or we used to. Now we've changed that a little bit, but so I recently bought a lawn tractor, and it came with an 18 horsepower motor in it. All right. Now, I don't know how they equate that to a horse, but I can tell you right now, if I hooked that 18 horsepower motor up behind one of these and tried to pull against it, just one of them would make that tractor look like a Matchbox toy. I'm telling you. So I'm not sure how all that equates, but that's where we get that phrase from, and when we think about the power that a horse has. But this is the first picture that I have of this idea of meekness, this harnessed power. This harnessed power. The second thing that comes to mind is a passage in the New Testament. In fact, if you have your Bibles, I want to invite you to go ahead and turn there, or your Bible app, turn to Philippians chapter 2 in the New Testament. Philippians chapter 2. Paul writing to a group of believers, a group of people much like us gathered in this room. And in chapter 2, he begins by saying this. Just listen as I read some of this. He says, therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any communion sharing in the Spirit, or if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded. Everybody say like-minded. Having the same love, being of one in spirit and of mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but to the interest of each other. And then he breaks it down and he says this, and this is the part that I really want to look at. Verse 5. He says, in your relationship with one another. Remember, we've talked about all of these one another verses in the Bible, that there's at least 100 verses that talk about how we should live in relationship with one another. Well, this is one of these passages. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset. Everybody say mindset. Have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. And then he goes on. He says, who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. So he says, here's Jesus, the Son of God. He said he didn't consider his relationship, he didn't consider his commonality with God something to be used to his own advantage, something that he held on to. I like the way the NLT says it. It says, though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. In other words, he didn't feel like because of who he was that he had to hang on to this authority, to this power, to this, this idea that, hey, I am God. Don't forget that. He didn't have to hang on to that. But instead, it goes on and says this, rather, he made himself nothing. Everybody say nothing. He made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant and being made in human likeness. This, for me, this is the second picture, the second idea that always comes to mind, this passage and what Paul is teaching here about the person of Jesus Christ. For me, it's the perfect picture of this harnessed power, because I want you to think about this. This was the Son of God who became man, who took upon human flesh and became a servant. This same person we read about in John chapter 18 in the New Testament. So at the end of Jesus' life, the night that he's being arrested in the garden, and then the next day he would be crucified on the cross, it says that this band of soldiers and temple police came looking for him and to arrest him. And it's believed that there would have been at least 300 of these people. Now think about this. 300 guards come with chains and lanterns and ropes and who knows what else they had. Swords for sure. They come looking for this single person in a garden at night. Some 300 to 600 of them. And so they show up, they find this little band of people, it's Jesus and his disciples, and these policemen, these guards say, or Jesus looks at them, he says, who are you guys looking for? To which they respond and say, we're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. To which Jesus then says, I am he. And the moment that he says that, something happens. Some invisible power, some force that we just can't imagine. It says that all 300 to 600 of these men just fell backwards onto the ground. Now, Jesus didn't push them. It wasn't like he had 600 men to fight against him. It's him and 11 other people at that point. But when Jesus says this, again, I want you to see, because this is the power that he had at his fingertips, the power that he had at the tip of his tongue. I am he. And when he said that, all 300 plus men fell backwards to the ground. This is the power that took on human flesh. Meekness, harnessed power. Meekness is not weakness, it's power under control. Now, what does this have to do with today's discipline? Well, today's discipline is about serving. I've titled today, To Serve or to Be Served. To serve or to be served. And really, that's the challenge for today. Both Matthew and Mark, writers of the New Testament, record Jesus as saying this. Next slide, guys. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. First of all, I want you to note that it says that the Son of Man. Now, Jesus is saying this about himself. Why didn't he identify himself as the Son of God? Isn't that who he was? But instead, he identifies himself as the Son of Man because both are true about him. In fact, both titles are given to him in the Bible, especially in the New Testament, that he is both the Son of Man and the Son of God. The Son of God speaks to his deity, this power, this authority that he had, being equal to God the Father. In fact, he was God himself who came in human flesh. But the fact that this title, the Son of Man, and Jesus refers to himself as this way, is referring to this power that he was able to harness. And what he came to do, that he came to serve and not to be served. And why? So that he could serve you and me. Listen, if we were to sum up the life of Christ while he was here on earth, you could sum it up with one word. The word would be servanthood. Servant or servanthood. That defines the entire life of Jesus Christ. His whole life, he modeled the very thing that he said he came to do. Not to serve, or not to be served, but to serve. You know the last thing that he did before he was arrested that night? Before these guards found him in the garden? The very last thing that he did before that took place, he invited those closest to him to a meal. And it says about halfway through the evening, Jesus stood up and he took a towel and he wrapped it around his waist. And it doesn't say he served them their meal. No, he did something even more amazing. It says that he went around with a bowl of water and a towel and he washed every one of their feet. It was the ultimate picture of that time of what a servant looked like, to wash the feet of the guest who enter your home. And it says he went around and he washed the feet of every single one of his disciples. And then after doing that, it says he stood up and he said, guys, I know you don't get this. He says, but here's what just happened. I have set an example for you to follow. Now serve one another. Serve one another. Now, there's no way that I can stand before you and tell you that of all these disciplines that we're looking at, that one is more powerful, one is more important, or one produces more results than the other. Each of these disciplines that we're looking at and being challenged to do are important to incorporate into our lives. They have the power to change our lives for the better. When it comes to servanthood, servanthood has just as great a reward as praying, as worshiping God, as being in a small group, as having a daily devotion. It's not greater than, it's not less than, but it is equal to all of these disciplines that we're talking about. Last week, we talked about the discipline of worship. And I'll be honest with you, one of the greatest ways to worship God is to serve others. Because Jesus himself said, when we serve others, especially the least of these, we are serving him. So not a greater way than we can worship God than by serving others. But I will say this, just like all the other disciplines, serving is a trained discipline. A trained discipline. And here's why I say that. Let's go back to Ephesians chapter 2, verse 5. In your relationship with one another, have the same mindset. Again, everybody say mindset. Have the same mindset as Jesus Christ. In other words, we need to think like Jesus thought. We need to think like Jesus thinks. You know, think about this. If we have to be reminded to do this, it's probably because we're not doing it. Isn't that fair to say? That's true of all of these, and why we're looking at them and why we're encouraged from Scripture to do these things, probably because we're not doing them. So on the back of your program, there's a fill in the blank. I just want you to remember this, that serving is a mindset. Serving is a mindset, a way of thinking that must be trained. It goes against the natural way that we think because we're more about being served than we are serving. And the choice is always this, to serve or to be served. Now, speaking of choices, let me get into the real challenge part of today. Let's bring this home. Jesus said this in Matthew 23:11. He said, the greatest among you will be your servant. The greatest among you will be your servant. Maybe a better way to say that or to interpret what Jesus said would be this. Those who get the most out of life, those who get the most out of life will be those who serve others. The greatest among you will be those who serve you. Those who get the most out of life will be those who serve others. Or, as Jesus said, those who are meek will inherit the earth. Do you know why some businesses are so much more successful than others? It's not because they're bigger. It's not because they have more money, more resources at their disposal. The reason that companies are so much better than others is because they have learned how to serve their customer better than anybody else. give you a couple examples. Anybody ever stay at the Ritz-Carlton? Anybody? I haven't stayed there. I can't afford to stay there. But I know some people who have. In fact, I know some people who, after the first time they went there, they went back only because of the service that they received the first time. They were just blown away by it. But this hotel is known for its service to its customers. That nothing out there, I'm being told, compares to that. And if you stayed there, you've probably experienced that. I think of Disney World. Anybody been to Disney World? I have been there, and I was blown away even the time that we went, just how they went out of their way. Here was an amusement park of all things, who just went out of their way to make sure that we had the best experience possible. They have mastered this idea of serving others. Do you know the one place that should be known for its service more than any place else? Should be the church. Should be the church. But you know what? I'm sad to say that it's not. In fact, do you know the number one word that's being used today in culture to define those of us who attend church on a regular basis? It's not servants. It's the word consumers. That's the word that is most used to define the average churchgoer. People come to church for what they can get out of it, not what they can give to it or contribute to it. Do you know why the church isn't the greatest? Because we stink at serving one another. We really do. We've forgotten how to serve one another. We've become so self-serving. Now, that's not true of all of you, but it is true of most of you. And here's why I say that. It's a known fact that in the average American church, this is called the 20-80 rule, and it's this: 20% of the people do 80% of the work. 20% of the people who attend a local church do 80% of the work that goes on there. That means that 80% of the people who attend there are consumers, not servers. Now, some of you are getting a little uncomfortable, but let me just remind you, this series is about the ultimate challenge, and if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you, all right? So just keep that in mind. So this week, as I got to thinking about this, 20% of the people do 80% of the work. So that means, and I never thought about this statement in this way before. I got to think about, okay, well, 80% of the work, what about the other 20% of the work? What's going on there? Who is doing that? And the truth of the matter is, no one is doing it. 20% of the work, in fact, go to the next slide, 20% of what needs to be done is going undone. 20% of what needs to be done is going undone. Why? Because there's no one to do it. So here's the wake-up call. If you're not serving, someone is going unserved. If you are not serving, someone is going unserved. And at the heart of it, that means Jesus is going unserved. You're not serving God. You're just in this for what you can get from God. You're not in it for what you can give back to God. In fact, Jesus himself told us that if we're not serving others, we're not serving him. In Matthew 25, verse 45, he says this: "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for who? For him, for Christ." So let me, again, if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. Nothing will change. So let me ask you a couple questions. Here's the big one. When you came here this morning, did you come to be served or to serve? When you came here this morning, did you come to be served or to serve? Let's go beyond the walls of the church for just a moment. When you get up tomorrow and go to work, are you going there to serve or to be served? When you go to work tomorrow, you're going there to serve. Listen, if you're paying for service, then you have every right to expect good service. We get that. I mean, if you go to a restaurant, you're paying for service, you expect, and you have every right to expect that kind of service. We've all had our experiences. If I were to ask you, name the worst service you've ever experienced, there's something that immediately pops to mind. If I ask you to think of the best service you ever received, that would come to mind as well. So, we've all had those experiences. I mean, I've been in a restaurant. I'll never forget that Lynette and I went into this one restaurant. It was almost empty. There were probably 75 tables in there. There were 4 tables that had customers there, and we were one of them. There was probably 7 or 8 people serving that day. And we sat there for 20 minutes after the hostess took us to our table and sat there. And no one ever came to serve us. They walked by our table. We thought, oh, here's the next one. And they just walked right by. It got to the point, and I said, if one more person walks by, we're getting up and leaving. And we got up and left. And I have yet to go back to that restaurant. That was over 2 years ago. So we get that, we understand that, okay? But what about you and me? When we go to work tomorrow, are we going to serve or to be served? If you're getting paid to serve, then you ought to be, as a follower of Christ, you ought to be the best server that you can be. Because that's how you're gonna get the most out of your work. If you're there to be served, then you're just gonna have a rotten attitude. But if you're there to serve, it'll change everything. You realize that when you come to church, and just to make this analogy, to make sure that we're clear, and you give your tithes and offerings, that's not you paying to be served. That's you contributing so that we as a church together can serve others in Christ's name, so that we can do what we do. So you're not here to pay to be served, you're here to serve by giving. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page when it comes to that. Today, as we consider the spiritual discipline of serving, let's consider the ultimate challenge that Jesus gave to us. Luke 9:23, Jesus said this, then he said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves. A.W. Tozer said, when he described what Jesus did in Philippians chapter 2, he said, Jesus meeked himself. He meeked himself. That he intentionally allowed his power to be harnessed so that he could serve others. So Jesus says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, must meek themselves. That's what he's saying. Take up their cross daily and follow me. You see, Jesus wasn't looking for spectators and fans that day when he issued that challenge. Jesus was looking for fellow servers, people who would serve others alongside him. To serve or to be served, that's the question. To serve or to be served. Here at Atlee, we have 3 key ministry environments that we focus on. We say these are the 3 things that we're going to pay the most attention to and do the best that we can. And one of those is the weekend experiences, what you're having right now. Another is small groups. We've talked about that throughout this series. And the third area that we're committed to is an area called extension ministries. And this is where the idea of serving others comes into play. We say extension ministries is when people extend beyond themselves to serve others. And then under that environment, we break it down into 2 categories. Inside the church as well, and then outside the church. So there are places that we should serve each other inside the walls of the church, the ministries that we do week after week, but we also should be involved in serving others outside the church as opportunities present themselves. So today, here's how we're going to wrap this up. Here's the challenge that we're going to give you. We're going to give you a challenge for outside the walls of the church, and then we're going to give you a challenge for the inside of the walls of the church, a way that you can get plugged in and serve others. So the first one is this. It's pretty simple. This week, as you go throughout your week, I want you to find somebody that you can go out of your way to serve. Pretty simple. Go out of somebody that maybe you don't know them, maybe you do, but somebody that you can say, you know what, this week I'm going to go out of my way to serve them. And some of you just already know who that is, and so I want to encourage you to write that down. If not, I want you to be thinking about that. Maybe the teller at the bank or whoever it might be, your coworker, could be your spouse, could be your mother, your father. But find somebody that you can go out of your way to serve. The second part of this has to do with inside the church. So in just a few moments, the campus pastors are going to come out at all of our campus, and they're going to issue you a specific challenge to your campus. So a couple weeks ago, I challenged them. I said, guys, here's the deal. We got this week coming up, and so I'm going to challenge people. We're going to give them specific ways that they can serve. And so I said, if you had 3, maybe 4 people who could do whatever it is you need done and are willing to do it, what would those 3 or 4 things be? You know, things that maybe something that's not being done that falls in that, 20% place that, man, if we were doing this, just think of what we could do as a church. What would those 3 positions be? And so in just a few moments at all of our campuses, even here at this one, your campus pastor is going to come out and tell you what they are specifically to your campus. I'm going to speak, though, first of all, on behalf of our online campus. They're busy this morning broadcasting the service and attending to those people. But and I want to do this one because you don't have to attend this campus here in Mechanicsville to be a part of our online campus. You really don't. In fact, you really don't. In some of the roles that we need filled there, you don't even have to attend a physical campus to fill some of those roles. But I asked Pat, who's serving as our online campus pastor, what are the 3 biggest needs that you have? And the first one she gave me was we need an IT person. A person who just makes sure that week after week that everything is working as it relates to the computer, as it relates to the internet, all that stuff that I don't understand, but some of you get, just to sit there and make sure that it happens, that the service gets broadcast. We just need some more people to fill in so that one person isn't trying to do it week after week. The second thing that we need is some hosts. People who can join into the conversation that's taking place online every Sunday morning. If you've ever watched online, you know what I'm talking about. But basically just welcome people, have conversations with them just like many of you do when you walk into the physical campus here. You have conversations with people. We're looking for people. Think of them as greeters and ushers, people that just kind of greet people. To help them navigate the online experience and all that they can get from that. And then the third is this, prayer partners. Prayer partners. There's 2 ways you can help out there. One, just praying for that service every Sunday. And then the others, we have people who send in prayer requests through that. Like you fill out a card here at a physical campus, there's a way that they can do that online. We could use some people who would just partner with Pat and some others to pray for those folks. And so, again, you don't have to attend this campus to be a part of that. And so on behalf of them, I issue you those 3 challenges. So if that's you're an IT person, you wonder, man, how can I use my gifts? I can tell you this is an incredible way that you can do it. If you like talking with people, especially online, maybe you're better, typing and doing this thing online as opposed to face-to-face, then this would be you. And then prayer. If your spiritual gift is praying, then this is a great way for you to plug in. So those are 3 specific ways that you can help out at that campus. If that is you today, then I need you, if you're here in Mechanicsville, just go across the lobby to our broadcast room over there, right there in the office, and see Pat as soon as this is over. If you're online or at one of our other campuses, then just pick up the phone this week and call Pat or send her an email, and she'd love to talk with you and get you plugged in. So that's 3 ways that you can do it. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to our campus pastors, and they're going to come out and give you 3 specific ways that you can serve at your campus.
We hope this message will help you continue to explore, experience, and express God's grace and truth for your life. If Atlee Church is making a difference in your life, we'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions from this message, we'd love to talk to you. Email us at stories@atleechurch.org. Check out our website for more about our community, our ministries, and how you can financially support Atlee Church to help us continue to share messages like this one. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe. We have links on our website, or you can search for us on iTunes to get this podcast every week. Thanks again, and hope to see you next Sunday.